the famed city of Argos, coded with myth and legend. From the legendary founders of the dim past to godlike Diomedes that charged at Ares himself, Argos was one of the most important city-states of ancient Greece, with its celebrated mythology more often than not overshadowing its history. In this episode, we go into the Bronze Age and shed light on the history of Argos throughout the Mycenaean Age. Mycenaean Greece is considered as the first civilization of the continental Europe. The Greek-speaking ancestors of what would be considered Mycenaeans began to emerge on the peninsula of Peloponnese during the later part of the 3rd millennium BCE. After supposed subjugation and assimilation of the rival tribes, the early Greeks, known as the Achaeans, established themselves in the region of Argolis, where they built several fortified cities. Besides their main stronghold, Mycenae, Achaeans established citadels such as Tiryns, Medea, and Argos. While modern scholars use the city of Mycenae as the namesake of a period today known as the Mycenaean Greece, the ancient Greeks themselves often used the term Argives while referring to their Bronze Age ancestors. In fact, the term Argives was used synonymously with terms Achaeans and Danaans while referring to their forefathers of the distant past. The reason for such terminology is not entirely clear, although it might have been due to the term Argos being used more broadly in reference to the region of Argolis, as well as the plain of Argos, of which the capital was Mycenae and not the city of Argos itself. For this reason, Greek mythology is sometimes vague when it comes to its reference to the legendary Argive kings and heroes. Were they connected specifically to the city of Argos, or rather to the area of Argos, which would have had its seat at Mycenae or perhaps Tiryns? By the classical times, the latter two cities were mere shadows of their former selves, while the Dorian-dominated Argos monopolized the ancient tradition and seized mythology for itself. During the Bronze Age, however, Argos did represent one of the original Achaean settlements in Argolis, alongside Mycenae, Tiryns, and Medea, all four being inhabited all the way from the Neolithic times. By 2000 BCE, a significant local settlement emerged on the plain between the two hills, the higher one called Larissa and the lower one called Aspis. While traces of Neolithic and early Helladic habitation exist on the Larissa hill, it was Aspis together with the ridge called Deiras and the plain of Argos of the Middle Helladic settlement between 2000 and 1600 BCE. The summit of the Aspis was home to the central buildings, possibly surrounded by walls. Both matte-painted and Minoan ware date to this period, as well as imports from the Minoan Crete. Legendary accounts record an autochthonous king, Inachus, after whom the nearby river Inachus was named. His wife, Argia, likewise served as the eponym for the region of Argolis. A few generations later, their successor, King Argos, would give his name to the city of Argos. The cities of Argos, Tiryns, Medea, and Mycenae would seemingly continue to be unified under one king throughout most of Greek mythology, a practice which seems to be in line with the historical record and archaeological evidence. Unlike Mycenae, which was the largest and the most well-fortified citadel of all, Argos was comparatively a smaller settlement, ruled perhaps by a local prince under the authority of the Mycenaean king, who wore the title of Wanax. By 1600 BCE, the Mycenaeans started expanding from Argolis, eventually becoming masters of Peloponnese before taking on the rest of the Greek mainland. Argolis soon became the wealthiest region in continental Greece, with its population on steady rise. The city of Argos saw fruits of the Achaean expansion, and by 1500 BCE, it became a medium-sized Mycenaean palace center. Its palace or acropolis was erected on the Larissa hill, together with the Megaron, granary, and several other administrative buildings. The acropolis was soon protected with a cyclopean wall, typical for a Mycenaean city. The foot of the nearby Aspis shifted from being the central part of the city into being the burial ground for the Argive leaders. The Argive nobility were buried in large chamber tombs, which were cut into the bedrock of the hill. They were buried together with extensive Mycenaean pottery and jewelry made of bronze, sealstone, ivory, and other materials. While chamber tombs signified the wealth possessed by the Argive elites, they also showed that the wealth of the palace of Argos was far from being on the level of the major citadels. Compared to the other sites, Argive chamber tombs were still not the grand royal burials like those of Mycenae and Pylos, where even wealthier Tolos tombs were constructed and rulers buried with vast gold. In Greek mythology, Argos was a place of continuous swaps and struggle when it came to the throne. According to the legend, the whole region was once ruled by the fearsome king Abas, who extended Argive domain beyond Peloponnese and established Achaean colonies in Phocis and Thessaly. Following his death, however, his sons Acrisius and Proetus entered a war of succession, with Acrisius expelling his twin brother from the kingdom. Proetus fled to Lycia, from which he obtained military support and returned to Argolis to continue the war effort. Eventually, a settlement was reached, where Proetus became Basileus of Tiryns, while Acrisius retained Argos, presumably including Mycenae and ruling as the senior king. Acrisius was succeeded by his grandson and legendary hero Perseus, while Proetus passed the rule of Tiryns to his son Megapenthes. Perseus would go on to switch with Megapenthes, giving him the rule over the city of Argos while exchanging it for the citadel of Tiryns. In one version of the story, Perseus then founded the city of Mycenae, which served as his royal seat. In another version, he only fortified Mycenae, which already existed as the main Argive citadel. Either way, Perseus's descendants would keep direct control over both Mycenae and Tiryns in the coming generations. The rule over Argos was passed to Megapenthes' son Argeos. However, it would be soon fragmented even further. During the reign of Argeos' son Anaxagoras, a deal was made with a renowned healer, Melampus, to either heal Anaxagoras' son's illness or the Argive women, which were cast under a madness spell of god Dionysus. In exchange for healing, Melampus demanded 1/3 of Argos for himself and another third for his brother Bias. Anaxagoras ultimately agreed, and thus the kingship of Argos was split into 3 dynasties. Legendary hero Diomedes was a member of the dynasty of Bias and would lead the Argive contingent in the Trojan War under the authority of the Mycenaean king Agamemnon. It wouldn't be until after the Trojan War that the trinary rule in Argos would be reduced to a single Basileus during the reign of Syllabares, himself from the lineage of Anaxagoras. However, when Syllabares himself died without an heir, Argos was transferred back to the direct authority of Mycenae, ruled by Agamemnon's son, Orestes. Argos continued to serve as an important regional palace in Argolis until the collapse of the Mycenaean Greece in the 12th century BCE, not long after the Trojan War. Catastrophic downfall of the Bronze Age civilizations did not spare the Mycenaeans, who amid economic collapse and political instability saw almost all of their palace centers either destroyed or abandoned during the 1100s. Ancient Greek writers attributed this collapse to the so-called return of the Heraclidae, during which the descendants of Heracles, together with their Dorian allies, invaded Peloponnese from the north and ended the remnants of the Achaean palace centers for good. By 1100 BCE, Greece entered the period known as the Dark Ages, which would last until about 800 BCE. During this period, a Heraclid dynasty would emerge in Argos, with Dorians replacing the Achaeans as the main political force in Argolis.